Hi, I'm Fran, I'm an addict. First, I always tend to forget to do this because I get nervous, but I would really like to thank the committee for asking me to come here. I was here, my date's probably wrong, where's Shelley, 1985? Was that the East Coast? And that was my last convention in Baltimore, so it was quite a while ago. But when Rod called and asked me to speak, I have to laugh about the people in my life because they build a reputation for me. I said something very flip to him on the phone, and he said, now I know where they get their mouth. And I said, who? And he says, Tina and Shelley. They're both arrogant, just like you. So I get blamed for their behavior. But beside the committee, there's a lot of people that came here with me tonight to support me. And again, that becomes a wonderful thing in my life. My sponsees and other friends from Danielle's here, they come in to support me, and meanwhile they have a date on the side, but I get blamed. They're coming to good old support Fran, and that's the last I see of them for the weekend. But I'm glad they're here anyway. I don't have a war story to tell. I really don't. It's real short. I went all through Catholic school, and I think at the age of 14 or 15 I wanted to become a nun, and I don't think that's too unusual at that age going through Catholicism. And at 16 I was pregnant with my first daughter. At 17 I was pregnant with my second daughter, and at 19 I was doing time in the old women's house of detention for prostitution in New York. And all I knew is that was a big jump from being a nun to being a hooker. And what absolutely amazed me is it happened so quick. It's like I just woke up and it was happening. My life went on that way, in and out of different states, in and out of different jails, until finally I hit the state of California, and I was sentenced from 1 to 14 years in a state prison. Each time I walked out of a jail, every single time I walked out, I said, never again. And I meant it with all my heart every time I said it. And 3 months later, there I was, back doing time for something new. One of the amazing things about being here this weekend is we've met each other before, but it's the first time we're going to share a convention. Your speaker for tomorrow night was in that same penitentiary with me 26 years ago. So we've kind of known each other for a few years. I came out of that prison, and again I said, never again. And it was November 10th, 1966. The most amazing thing in the world happened. I never, ever got high again. That is the only thing I did right. The reason I never have to tell a war story is the rest of my recovery is one. I guess I felt I hadn't suffered enough out there, so I decided to suffer a little bit in recovery. I made those choices, and I paid for every one of those choices. When I came out, first of all, I had a very bad time believing I was an addict. I mean, I love that, jails all over the country, but I didn't connect any of it to the drugs. I really thought my behavior was fucked up. But if everybody would just leave me alone, I'd be fine. But they kept bothering me. I came out and I really, really gave it a shot. 25 years ago, I don't think it's ever a good time to be an ex-con, but 25 years ago was really pretty tough. And I found a lot of doors closed. And I was desperate. I was clean, but my life was miserable. I had 2 kids that I finally decided to pick up on my way out of a prison. They were 10 and 11 years old. I had never been a mother. They only saw my back on the way out of a door someplace every once in a while. And now I had these kids, I had to hold down a job. I didn't know how to do this. And one night I was really desperate and I knew I was going back. And I picked up a newspaper and I read about an organization of ex-convicts. And I thought, well, maybe I can grab on there. And I made that phone call. And I spent the next 7 to 10 years of my life hanging out with them, and they were my salvation. It was something a little similar to us. It wasn't a healing and it wasn't steps. They were just a bunch of ex-cons trying to help one another make it and do something about prison conditions. And I hung in there. I can't tell you what a disaster I made out of my life. One of the women started taking me to meetings, and there was no NA in those days, and I was going to another fellowship. And I didn't have any idea why I was there. I thought they were crazy people because I didn't understand them laughing at sad stories. And I would just sit there and say, they're nuts, I just don't belong here. And it was also very, very bad years for us in that fellowship. I wasn't allowed to share, and I couldn't go to closed meetings. And they didn't want to hear from us then. But I kept going, and I have no idea why. When I was without drugs, let's put it that way, for about 9 months or so, it was summertime, and I pulled up at a meeting one night. My sponsor was hanging outside, and I was in a Cadillac. And she just looked at me, and I got out of the car, and she says, where'd you get the car? I said, it's my boss's car. And she said, your boss gives you a Cadillac to go to a meeting in? And I said, yeah, he's a trick. And she goes, what do you mean he's a trick? I said, he's a John. And she looked at me and she said, Fran, you can't be doing that in here. And I said, why? She says, you just can't be doing that. So I said, okay, no more turning tricks. About 15 months into the rooms, she called me outside one night, and she was so calm. And she said, Fran, a couple of the women came to me because when you opened up your pocketbook to get out your cigarettes, they said you have a pistol in your pocketbook. I said, yeah. And she said, can I ask you what the gun is for? I said, the robberies. She asked me, what robberies? I says, the ones I commit to pay my fucking bills. I mean, what other robberies are there? And she looked at me and she said, you can't be doing that here either. I kind of got left in a space. I didn't quite get what you did here. But also realized that I was sick enough that when I came into a meeting and they said, don't pick up and go to a meeting, that's exactly what I thought you meant. So I didn't pick up, and I went to a meeting. No one told me I had to stop doing crimes. So for the first 2 years of my recovery, I wasn't busted. And there has to be a higher power, because believe me, I was not a smart criminal. And somehow I didn't get busted. And I just kept coming. I used to watch other people doing the steps. They'd all go to these step meetings and talk about steps. And I kept saying to my sponsor, how come we're not talking about steps? And she'd look at me and hold my hand. She'd say, you're too sick. She said, later, just keep coming to a meeting. And I hated that because all my life I felt different. All my life I felt I didn't belong someplace. And I was feeling that again. Everybody else was doing something I wasn't doing. But I often think back about that lady, and she was a real smart lady. You see, I was so sick that I didn't have any idea how sick I was. I didn't just walk out of a prison. I walked out of a psychiatric treatment unit for criminally insane. I really wasn't playing with a full deck and didn't have any idea. And she knew I couldn't handle it. Just keep coming to a meeting. And she hung in there with me. And then eventually I began to work on the steps, and it didn't make any sense to me. And again, I was clean, and that's all I was. There was no recovery. Finally, in my 5th year of being clean, I married an active addict. Now that's when I was well, so that gives you a hint of how sick I was when I was active. Now the marriage wasn't born in heaven, it lasted 3 months. But an amazing thing happened for me. I got into such pain behind that relationship, I went to another fellowship for families. And all of a sudden, I was allowed to share. People didn't care that I used drugs. They didn't care that I was in prison. They didn't care I was an addict. I was welcome because we were playing with a different ball game here. And I finally felt okay, and life went on. And I stayed clean, and I did it the best way I could do it. But I knew there was no happiness. And I kind of accepted that something was wrong with me and this is the way I was going to spend the rest of my life. And I could survive that way. It was okay. And along the way, about 8 or 9 years ago, one of my very best friends who'd been clean for 5 years takes she didn't take a slip. She took a landslide down some mountain. And she was in pretty bad shape. And I was determined to get her clean. And I went on this rampage with her. And someone came to me and said, do you know there's a thing in New York called NA? Do you know what it is? I says, I know where it is, but where is it? She goes, it's underground, you have to find it. Well, we went on this hunt. And there was a few meetings already started in New York. And I found one and I began taking her. Now, again, I felt like such an outsider. First of all, age-wise, I felt like everybody's grandmother. There were all these young kids showing up in the rooms. My first couple of meetings were on a place called St. Mark's Place in New York. And in the secretary's break, they would say, is there anyone here under 90 days? And the entire room would raise their hand. Right? And I would sit there and say, maybe after you have time, you don't belong here. And I didn't have any idea what was happening. But I just knew, I felt I didn't belong here. And I stayed because of her. Then before I knew it, she was slipping and sliding, going in and out, and she'd be leaving meetings early. And before you knew it, she wasn't coming to the meetings anymore, but I still was. And it took a while before I realized I wasn't there for her anymore. I was there for me. And I can't begin to tell you the changes that have happened in my life in these 8 years. And they happened the day I walked through the door of a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. I didn't know it then, but I can look back now and know just what happened to me. And I say it over and over, and it had everything to do with our first step. You know, there are fellowships that says they're powerless over alcohol, they're powerless over food, they're powerless over pills. We are the only fellowship that says we're powerless over our addiction. And one of the things that I had to learn, and this is just for me, that this addict was addicted to alcohol, to drugs. I didn't smoke 1 pack of cigarettes, I smoked 2.5 packs. I don't have 1 cup of tea a day, I have about 25. I was in and out of addicted to relationships, to people pleasing. I realized I had the ability to abuse the shit out of anything that can be abused. And finally, that's what being an addict meant to me. And I realized then what was going wrong in my life. I bought the fallacy that all you had to do was put something down and your life was going to be fine. Well, I hate to tell you newcomers this, it don't work. It was about doing some work that I didn't know existed. So the first step became a whole thing about me looking at my life and realizing what the hell was really wrong. And now the road to doing something about it was going to begin. And I have to be honest. If I knew what was waiting for me down the road when I first walked in these doors, I would have told you all to drop dead and I would have left. But thank God, when I came in, someone lied to me, just like we lied to the newcomers. And we tell them, all you gotta do is put the drugs down. And they believe us, you know? Well, I believed it too, and I'm grateful I did. I didn't have any problems at all with the second step. I had no problems with being insane. I knew that. I accepted that. When I understood more and more what insanity was in this program, repeating the same things over and over and expecting a different result, I have done it all my life. I continue to do it, and I will probably do it till the day I die. That was a piece of my life that was going to be there. I get better, but it don't ever go away. I had a real bad problem with the third step because it's where the word God came in. And boy, I was one angry Catholic. I didn't know a loving God. See, I knew somebody who was going to zap you and you didn't even have to do anything wrong. All you had to do was think about it and you were zapped. So I couldn't get into that this was a loving person, and I couldn't get there. And people would say to me, it could be good orderly direction, it could be a doorknob, it could be, and I was so angry. And my attitude was, if that's what you mean, get that word off those shades we have. I didn't want to see the word God. And then I realized they weren't going to change the program for me. I had to work past it. For a little while, I was able to use the rooms, because I realized no matter how crazy I was feeling, if I came to a meeting, something calmed me down. Now, when I left the meeting, I could be just as nuts again, but I had enough sense to know for an hour and a half, I knew how to calm down. So in a crazy way, you were a power greater than me. That worked till I got to the fifth step. Now they were telling me I had to kind of give this to you, and I didn't trust you. You were a dope fiend just like me. So I had to go on a search for a higher power. It took me more years than it should have. I wish it had happened earlier, it didn't. But I realized I always had a higher power. I always believed in something, even if it was the cop man. I believed in something. And I realized I was hung up on a word, not a concept. So I had to change the word. So at that point, I made a decision to call my higher power Harry. And Harry and I have a very special relationship, and we've had one for years. And it worked for me. It didn't make my higher power any different than yours. The name was a little different, that's all. And I have a real special relationship with Harry. The fourth and fifth step, I don't know why it has the reputation it has, and it has it worse in our fellowship than any of the others. We all think it's a real big disaster. And I got scared. I did my fifth step 3 times. I don't have regrets. I really did do it to the best of my ability at that time. But I had a secret. And it was a secret I wasn't going to give to any other human being. So each time I did my fifth step, each one got a little better than the one in front of it. But the secret was going to my grave. Nobody was getting that. But I was disappointed after I did it. I would do it and think, something's supposed to happen now. And nothing happened. And I realized all that happened for me was I was now able to go into a 6th and 7th step and say I did the other 2. But my life didn't change. I didn't change. So there was this letdown. It took a few years before I realized one thing had changed. When I came into NA, I did a 5th step with one of my sponsees. And I finally did an honest 5th step. And I gave up the secret. And I realized what had happened to me is the one thing the 5th step gave me was I finally trusted another human being. That's all it was about. It wasn't about the secrets. It was about trust. And I realized how, as much as I thought I could really trust other people, I didn't trust anybody. You know, I love it when we see newcomers in the room. I sit back and smile. You know how somebody's here for about the 32nd day and they're hysterical crying in the rooms and you hear them share and somebody will say, I'm so grateful to be in this program where I can trust you people enough to break down and cry. And I just look at them and want to say, you're kicking, you stupid ass. It has nothing to do with trust. It's the drugs and the depression and stuff after the cocaine's kicked your ass. But all of a sudden, at 31 days, after spending 20 years as a dope fiend, we trust, right? And what happened to me is when I used to hear people saying that, I believed them. So I thought something was wrong with me, that I couldn't get where they were. But I did trust, and I went ahead on. And one of the things I learned is that every step came into my life exactly when it was supposed to. Nobody warned me about those next 2 steps. Nobody. because what I realized was all this shit that you made me take a look at, now you were telling me I had to change it. And I remember when I first came to meetings and I looked at 6 and 7 about character defects, I thought anybody in their right mind would want to get rid of their character defects. Who wouldn't? Well, when I got there, I realized I didn't. And I didn't know how to work past it. It wouldn't go away. I think I honestly pray. I'm not a prayer, so I honestly tried to the best of my ability of dealing with a higher power to get rid. Wouldn't go. And what worked for me was to realize that in my recovery, what I was calling character defects and shortcomings were my best friends and my survival mechanisms in those streets. They weren't defects and they weren't bad things. They kept me alive. And without them, I wouldn't be standing here today. So I had to stop looking at them like they were bad things. And what I began to do is embrace them as my friends and realize that my life had changed and I don't have a need for them in my life anymore, and I had to learn how to say goodbye to them, one at a time. I lied, I stole. The biggest problem I've had all through recovery was I couldn't cry. That wasn't a defect. I spent enough years in prisons that if I walked around crying, I would have got killed. It kept me alive, not falling apart like that. And I had to learn that it was okay that I was that way, and little at a time I was going to let go. I also accepted the fact that some of my character defects were ingrained in concrete and they weren't going anywhere. And one of the things that I learned to accept and work with was how to work around them. That I wasn't ready to get rid of them, so I better learn how to live with them. One of the things I always talk about when I speak at convention, and I do it as a joke, but it's not funny, but it's the only way I can deal with it. When I go to meetings back home, I always sit up front. And I don't sit up front because that's where you hear the message. I don't know anybody in the world except my sponsees. I mean, Tina and Shelley are here tonight, they could match me, that could take other people's inventory as well and as thorough as I can. And if I go into a meeting and I sit in the back, I will sit there and watch who walks in with who's making the eye contact back and forth, who's making the coffee together, and God forbid you come into a meeting late, raise your hand and share and leave early, I talk about you like a dog. Right? So what I learned how to do was sit up front. Because what I don't see, I can't talk about. So I wasn't ready to finish the gossip, so I put myself in a position not to gossip. And that was the best I could do with that. The next steps came in, and I made my list. And I don't think I was unusual, because I've heard others doing the same thing. As I made my list, I kept the people the closest to me last, which was the story of my life. I could deal with people that I don't have any intimate relationship with much easier. So I go ahead and made this list, and I began these amends, and it took years. And finally I was down to my kids. And it was the amends I didn't want to make. I had absolutely destroyed 2 lives. And I had to live with that guilt. One of the things that made me feel horrible was that I could pick up a strange man off the street and I could lay up with him for a weekend and tell him I loved him. And I couldn't touch these 2 kids and tell them I loved them. Because it was a risk. And I couldn't take that risk. And finally it was time. My youngest was coming over one night. She picked up when she was 16 and she was an active addict, full blown. I stupidly went to war with her disease for 2 years, like I was going to do something about it. And we had ended that war, and we'd come to peace with each other. And she was coming over. It was a Friday night. And I knew it was time that we needed to talk. So I was kind of hoping she'd come straight so she could hear what I was saying to her. And she came in, and I was finally able to say that I was sorry for everything I had ever done. and that I wish I could turn the clock back and undo every bit of it, but I couldn't. And that I was trying to be responsible for my life today, and how bad I felt that she was in such pain. And I wish I could make that go away, and I couldn't. And I think it was the very first time, she was 20 years old, and it was the very first time we ever held each other. We put our arms around one another, we held each other. I told her I loved her. She told me she didn't blame me for her addiction, and she felt a little luckier than most people. If she decided to do something about it, she knew where to go. And we hugged each other goodbye, and I felt real good because it was the first time I ever did that with her. And 24 hours later, I got the phone call she was dead of an overdose. And whenever I think about the night of that phone call, I always think about my reaction to it. Because when I hung up the phone, I can remember looking up and saying, thank you. Thank you that I don't have to live the rest of my life and wonder, why didn't I ever tell her I loved her? Why didn't I ever say I was sorry? I had a lot of gratitude that I was able to have the night I had with her before she died. And I didn't have unfinished business. And I was forced to take a look at another side of my character defects, one I didn't like very much. I have a bad time with my soft side. You know, I can be angry and I can call somebody all kinds of names, but I don't know how to tell people how I feel about them. I just couldn't get there. And all of a sudden, when Patty died, I realized how important it was to let people know how I feel, because we don't know if they're going to be there tomorrow. And because I knew it didn't make it easy to happen. You know, God bless my sponsees. I don't know how they survived early years with me. My way of caring about somebody was to call them all kinds of bitches. If I cursed at you and I called you those names, you were supposed to know that meant you were special in my life. Because if I didn't like you, I ignored you. So they kind of had to accept that this was a token of my caring about them. So they took a lot of abuse. I kid about it now. I'm still not good at it. Once in a blue moon, I'll say something nice to them, and I'll say, that's it for the end of the year. See you next year. Because it comes hard to me to let that side of me come up. When she died, I thought a piece of me had died. And that there was a hole someplace in my gut that would never, ever again be filled. And I had to learn how to live with that hole. And life went on. People stayed with me. People saw me through it. And my recovery went on. I didn't have a very bad time taking my own inventory. Nobody could take my inventory like I could. If anything, I needed to learn how to stop beating myself up, not taking a look at what I had just done wrong, because as far as I was concerned, everything I did was wrong. I had a real bad time getting into meditation, because even if I shut my mouth, I didn't know how to shut my head down. My head would just go toot, 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 and I didn't understand how to stop. Somebody told me to go to the library. It's nice and quiet there. I always remember my trip to the library because I was such an addict. I went and it's nice and quiet, and it took me all of 5 minutes before I'd be staring at the counter and I'd be watching somebody's face and looking at the books they were checking out and trying to figure out why that person would check out that particular book. I was even into their business and I didn't even know who they were. So a library didn't work. And all of a sudden, after many, many years, I found a church. Now, I'm not a religious person, so I don't care what kind of a church it is. But there's something quiet about a church that gives me some peace. And I began to learn how to quiet the mind down a little bit and just be. The most special step, and I guess it's my whole story of recovery for me, the 12-step. I try to live my program the best I can. It just doesn't come out of my mouth. And I'm honest about my program. And I began hearing about people talking about spiritual awakenings and spiritual awakenings. I didn't know what the hell it was. And I realized I needed to stop looking for that maybe when I died I'd have a spiritual awakening someplace. But what was happening to me is I was having spiritual experiences. And the best way I can explain them to you, for me, is every once in a while, I am allowed, for some reason, to know, without any doubt in my mind, that I'm exactly where I was supposed to be at that given moment. And that feeling comes, and there's peace. Something happens inside, and it's a feeling that there is no explaining. And I realize there's a calmness that happens and a wonderful, peaceful feeling. Now, it doesn't last very long. It will last a couple of days and go away, but I've learned to appreciate them when they come. And there's been quite a few for me in NA, and for some reason, my spiritual experiences always happen at conventions. I was in a convention, a world convention, in Chicago, and we were sitting at a table. It was a big round table, and there was a man sitting opposite me. And I wrote out a note, and I passed the note around to him. And he opened up the note, and he read it, and he took it, and he held it to his heart. And the two of us just sat there with tears rolling down our faces. About 18 years before that night, I had been standing on a street corner on 72nd Street and Broadway, and I was stoned. And I was evil, so I must have been on some pills, because that's usually how I got on pills. But I was evil. And this man had walked up to me and he said, "Hello, are you okay?" And I looked up and I said, "Get away from me." And he didn't get away. He said, "Have you eaten dinner tonight?" And I got louder. And I said, "I told you to get away from me." And by now, a crowd had started to gather because I was running my mouth real loud. And understand I was a hooker. And all of a sudden, he says the wrong thing. He said, "Do you have money to eat?" And I thought he was propositioning me. And I looked up, and as loud as I could, I screamed, "Get the fuck out of my face, because I don't turn no tricks with no priest." And it was Father Dan Egan, the junkie priest, trying to get me to come in and eat. And it was him sitting opposite me at that convention in Chicago. And what I had put in the note is, 18 years ago, did you ever think you and I would be sitting in a room with 1,200 recovering addicts together? And at that moment, I knew that I was there with him, and it was exactly where I was supposed to be. And this feeling happened. And the funny thing is, he used to take us to meetings when we were all out in the street. He'd come around this little car and pick us up. And I can remember one time asking him, "Why the hell do you bother with us?" Because he knew we went right out to cop as soon as he left us. And he used to tell me, "Someplace down in here, there's a place that if I can ever help you get to it, it's a high beyond any high you've ever known, and that no drug can ever take you there." And that's what these spiritual experiences were for me, that high. He took me there. I had a sponsee, and she was sick, and I knew why she was sick. And she wouldn't go for the test, and she got sicker, and she got sicker. And she called me up one night, and she said she definitely wasn't going for the test, and she hopes I wasn't mad, and I hung up, and I was sitting there crying. And the phone rang. And this man on the other end of the phone says, "I'm so-and-so, and I'm an addict from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and we'd like to have you come speak." Well, all of a sudden, I started to laugh because I never knew there was really a place called Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I mean, I knew we had Oshkosh jeans, but I don't think I knew they came from a place. So I told him the call was right on time and that I was coming. And all the way, we were all kidding in New York, like, what the hell was I going to do? And I mean, I thought maybe the cows got high. Who gets high in Oshkosh, Wisconsin? Well, I get to Oshkosh, and good old NA, and all the time thinking, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And I walk in the lobby, and who's sitting in the lobby waiting but Shelley and Peter? So I at least had somebody that I knew. And Shelley had just lost her mom, and she was going through a rough time, and there was a meeting called Grief and Recovery, and she wanted to go, so I went with her. And the meeting was good, and people were sharing, and Shelley left, and I stayed, and a young man got up. I used to call him a kid, but he got mad at me. He was pretty new in recovery, and one of the things he shared was he'd been given up for adoption when he was a child. And when he was 18, he signed up and went on the search and had found out where his mom was, and by the time he got there, she had died 10 years before. So his grief was that he was left with, why did she give me away? Why didn't she love me? And why didn't she care about me? And I just got up and left the meeting, and I was speaking the following night at the banquet, and I kept looking for him. And everyone's saying, who are you looking for? You don't know anybody here. And finally I saw him come in, and I went down to his table, and I kissed him on the cheek, and I told him who I was, and I said, tonight's for you. And he thought I was totally out of my mind. And when I finished speaking, I talked about things I've done in my recovery, and one of them is, I had a child, a daughter, that I'd given birth to while I was in prison. And I had given her up for adoption. And one of the things I did was sign up at one of those places you can sign if you're a birth parent and you're willing to be found. And I explained that the reason I did that was that I believed she had a right to know her heritage, but more than that, she had a right to know that I finally loved another human being enough to give them a chance at life. I had already destroyed 2 children. I wasn't about to destroy the 3rd. And it was one of the hardest things I ever did. And when I got through speaking, Mark was crying. And we spent the rest of the weekend together. And he said to me, you'll never know what you gave me. He says, it never dawned on me she might have done it because she loved me. I always thought she didn't care. And we hugged and we cried. And I can remember saying to Mark, I owe you a lot, because I now know why I'm in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And it was for Mark. So again, I was able to leave a conference with that feeling of, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I got a phone call about 2 years later from Arizona asking me to come speak at a convention. And I couldn't go because I was now in graduate school getting my master's. I was somebody who didn't pass shit in high school. And here I was going through Fordham University getting a master's. We don't even know we're smart. We spent so many years trying to be stupid. And I told them it was my week of graduation and I couldn't go. Maybe another time. And they called me back the following year. Would I come to Arizona now? And I said, okay, you got it. And off I go to Arizona. And one more time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Because at that convention in Arizona, I met my daughter, who I gave up for adoption 23 years before. It got beyond my wildest dreams. Everything they told me was going to happen, happened. And I wish I could tell you why. When they said to me, you just need to take care of yourself and it will all fall in when it's supposed to, not when you want it. And all I had to do was get the hell out of my own way and just let it happen. So now I had a new daughter in my life. That hole that I thought would never, ever be filled. My oldest daughter adopted 2 children. And when my granddaughter gets me on the phone and says, hi, Grandma, I love you, I realize there's no more hole. And I have a chance to do for my daughter's kids what I could never do for my daughter. So if someone was saying to me, here, you got another shot at this and you can do this different this time. And I don't know a whole lot of people that get those kind of chances. I sucked as a mother. I hated being a mother and I was a disaster. But you want to know something? I'm a terrific grandmother. I also know it's because I can get the hell out at the end of the day. You know? The biggest change in my life came a few years after that. I got a phone call one year from Montreal. Would I come in and speak? Nope, can't make it. The next year I get a phone call from Montreal. Will you come in and speak? Nope, can't make it. And Peter and Shelley went that year. Shelley came back and she called me up and she said, if they ever ask you again, get your ass there. There's something different. Something is so different in Montreal, don't miss it. The third year they called me, will you come to Montreal? I said, you got it. So off I go to Montreal with one of my sponsees. And two men picked me up at the airport, and one is here with me tonight, Sergio. And we went out to eat, and during dinner, Sergio happens to say to me, you know, there's a person who chaired this convention, and he heard you a couple of years ago, and his dream was that someday we were going to get you to come to Montreal, and he was going to be the one to get up and introduce you at a convention. And this was the convention he was supposed to do that at, but he couldn't. He had ended up in the hospital earlier that week. He was in the last stages of AIDS, and he couldn't make it. So I looked over and I said, would you please give me the address to the hospital? And my sponsee looked at me and she goes, that's why we're here, isn't it? I said, I think so. And the next day, they had to send an interpreter with me because he only spoke French. And off we go to the hospital, and I remember when I walked in, he was like down to about 80 pounds, and all you saw were these eyes under a sheet. And he cried because I had come to see him. And we talked a little bit, and finally through the interpreter, I said to him, you're going to die soon, are you afraid? Because nobody ever talks to dying people, like, because they're dying, they're stupid now, they don't know they're dying. And he started to cry, and he said, yeah. And I began to talk about the people who died ahead of him. We don't lose newcomers. The people who are dying in our room for AIDS are people with time, people who've been in service. And I'm convinced, someplace in my head, that the reason they're dying first is wherever they've gone, they've started an NA meeting for us. And all we're going to do is leave one set of people to go to another. But we're going to stay with our people. And he began to cry, and I remember putting the side of the bed down and getting in bed with him and putting his head on my chest, and these nurses were going by in French, and all I heard them saying was Narcotic Anonymous, and they would go like this. They thought we were nuts. And I held Jocelyn, and one of the things that happened, and I feel bad for newcomers because this is not a message you should hear, but I found out he wasn't taking any medication. And I asked him why, and he used like a needle, that he was afraid of getting high. And I said, no. We don't have a punishing higher power in our life anymore. And you have a right to die with all the dignity there is, and you take whatever they're willing to give you, and you die in some peace. And he asked me, are you sure? Are you sure? And I said, I promise you. And I remember looking up to the sky and saying, and if I'm wrong, you take it out on me, not him. And when I left, I said goodbye to him and told him we'd meet in a better place someday. When I got back to the convention, everybody was real quiet and crying, because what happened is he got on the phone and he began doing all his death work, saying goodbye. So everybody was sobbing. And the night of the convention, the banquet, when I was going to speak, I got off the elevator, and I'd never heard 1,500 people be so quiet. And I remember saying to Sergio, what the hell is the matter? And he goes, you don't know, do you? And I said, what? They delivered him from the hospital to the convention to get up and introduce me at that banquet. And my one problem was I couldn't cry. Well, when I decide to do something, I don't do it little, I do it big time. So I decided to fall apart and break down in front of 1,500 people. I couldn't do it in the bathroom someplace. And I spent the entire weekend crying. And I thought, okay, it's over. I can go home now. This was about Jocelyn. And Sunday morning I got up and went down, and I can remember looking at the clock, and it was 20 to 11, and the meeting was going to begin at 11, and they let him stay overnight because they'd given him medication. And I remember looking over at Sergio and saying, it's not finished yet, I need you to do something for me. And I remember him saying, no more. We've had enough crying, no more. And I said, it's important. And I needed him to interpret with Jocelyn for me. And I went over and Jocelyn held my hand and I said, I need a favor from you. And he told me he would do anything. And I said, he was the only person I knew who was dying, and it had to be someone who was dying. And he said, anything I wanted. And I said, I have some unfinished business with my dead daughter, and I need you to take it for me. And I told him what the things that I felt I needed to say to her yet. And he promised me he would take that. And I left that convention finally finished. She had died 10 years before. And I was finally finished and willing to bury her. And one more time, it was an NA person who put some final stuff in my life for me. It has always been NA from the day I walked through these doors. NA taught me how to laugh, and it finalized things by teaching me how to cry. It taught me how to be a little soft when it was time to be soft. I have long come to grips with things I've done in my life, and I still have denial sneak back in there, right? And for me, one of the things I try to do is remember some of the insanity that when I decide, because there's times I think maybe I really wasn't that bad. And I've gone around to all these conventions speaking, and someday you're going to find out I wasn't that bad. So that denial still comes in, and I keep things up top in my head. And one of them's a little humorous today. It wasn't then. I've been arrested for a lot of things, but drugs was never one of them until one big day in my life. I was having a fight with a crime partner of mine. I pulled out a knife and I threatened to cut her up because she owed me $500. She wouldn't pay me. Somebody called the cops because they heard us. We were stoned. The cops come knocking on the door, and I'm such an asshole, I open the door up. Here's all the paraphernalia, here's all the drugs, and I let the cops walk to the door. So the cops and they heard us outside, and they saw me with the knife. And they took a look at me, they took a look at the drugs, and they took a look at the kitchen table. And they said, is this what you two are fighting over? And I said, yep, the bitch won't pay me the $500. We were playing Monopoly, and she had landed on my property. But you know when you're high, something feels so real that you really don't know it's a game anymore? And I was in this rage over this money. Well, off we go to jail. And in the squad car, she's telling me, listen, we can't go in this goddamn jail telling these bitches we got busted over a Monopoly game. So by the time we got there, we had made up this big robbery we had just committed. I need to remember that's where it took me. There's two other places it took me. There's another child I gave up for adoption. The problem with this one is I was out in the street when I did it. And when I went to sign up at the register, I sat there feeling like such a piece of shit. Because it asked for the child's birth date, and it was the first time I realized I didn't know. I have a daughter out there somewhere between the ages of 27 and 29 years old, and I don't have the slightest idea where she was born, what year she was born, or what month she was born. And I don't know too many goddamn women go around having babies and don't even know about it. But that's how bad I was. And the secret that I held in that fifth step, and I was finally able to let go, I lived in New Jersey, and the man I copped drugs from was a police officer. And I was dope sick one night, and I needed my drugs. And I called his house, and they told me he was working. That meant he was in a squad car, and he had a partner with him, so I had to be extremely careful about getting him to my house. I took my 9-month-old daughter, I filled the bathtub with water, and I floated her in it until she had enough water in her lungs that I could call 911 and get that cop to my house legitimately. I didn't even think about she could drown. I didn't give a shit that she could drown. All I knew is I needed my drugs. And any time I want to have the nerve to think that maybe I wasn't that bad, I need to remember where this shit took me. I go to meetings all the time. The reason I go, I wish I could stand up here and tell you what you're supposed to say at NA that's about drugs. It isn't about drugs for me anymore. But there's another Fran. She's obsessive, she's bitchy, she's all of it, and I don't like her. And the only way I know to keep her under control and to let me grow out is to be in these rooms. I don't know any other way. So I keep coming, you know, and things do get better. A couple of years ago, I was able to stand up at a convention. I had 21 years clean, and it was the first year of my life that I could stand up and say, guess what? I stopped lying this year. It took 21 years of recovery for me to stop lying. So recovery didn't come easy for me. One of the things I just want to say at the end is, this is something I have to do for me. I used to think one of the most precious, precious things we have in NA was our coin. And today I look at the back of that coin and I read it. And what it says is that no addict seeking recovery ever need die. And it's not true any longer. We have many, many of our people in our rooms who've come in for recovery, who've gotten clean, and we're losing them and they're dying. So it isn't about just recovery anymore. We're suffering a loss. And I have a whole lot of gratitude that I made it, and I feel bad that I'm losing brothers and sisters. But every time someone dies, I realize how much I want life. And I realize the bullshit that I get screwed up over, for what? I can go to my refrigerator and eat when I want to. I'm well, I have a job, I have it all. I'm watching somebody else die and I want to feel bad about Johnny didn't talk to me right last night. It's bullshit. You know, we're alive and we're well, and I want to thank all of you for giving me a room where I can say I'm Fran, I'm out.